And what we're going to do is talk about the name and our organization, but more importantly, we're really going to talk about the personal story, a short personal story that creates a little bit about context about who we are and why this work is so motivating to us, so just so you can get to know us as people a little bit. And then we're going to really dive into the topic about looking at this really important work from how we're trying to provide resources and funding to act as a catalyst to have it go even further and faster. So I will start off with my own introduction. I am Linda Lazor, as was mentioned. I'm from SV2, which is Silicon Valley Social Venture Fund, and many of you may or may not be aware of that organization, and the reason is because we're an actual group of individual partners and families who have really come together and pooled our resources to learn how to be more effective in giving around social issues like this, and also, quite frankly, to pool our funding. In terms of being more impactful in terms of the kind of funding we provide. And I got into this work because I co-led a grant round last year, believe it or not, called Pathways to Opportunity. That was the name of the grant round. And we looked at the areas of education, economic opportunity, as well as basic needs, affordable housing, and obviously they're all interrelated, and that created a real catalyst for saying, why don't we, for at least a portion of our grant making, make this a multi-year focus. And so I actually ended up even joining the staff team off of that because I got so impassioned about it. And the one personal story I'll share before I have my colleagues do the same is why I got so impassioned about this work is I had a true proximity experience. We've all heard about today the importance of being proximate. And I actually started volunteering in after-school programs for a pretty distressed community, and I've done this for several years, and got very close to the children and the families in that community, and I was just really saddened by how bright these children were and how they were just not getting all of the supports they needed to realize their potential, how incredibly hard the parents of all of my children were working, and yet did not have enough money to put together to have to choose between rent and food. And to me, in this valley in this Silicon Valley area, in this Bay region area, that should not be the case. And so that just totally has motivated me to want to be an ally and a supporter in any way I can. And with that, let me go ahead and go right down the line. And we have, by the way, Alexandra, who's from Silicon Valley Community Foundation, Elena from San Francisco Foundation, of Padmini from the Walter and Elise Haas Fund. So Padmini, why don't we start with you and just do your own introduction? We'll just go right down the line and then I'll get into the content of the questions.
Hi, everyone. Well, if you were here this morning, you already heard my introduction of who I am, but I'll share it again. I'm Padmini Parthasarathy. I'm Senior Program Officer for Economic Security at the Walter and Elise Haas Fund. And if you're not familiar with the fund, we're a private family foundation based in San Francisco, and we aim to foster a healthy, just, and vibrant Bay Area. So I wanted to share kind of essentially what motivates me in the work from a really personal perspective, which is really about my parents and their heritage and their immigration story. They came to the U.S. in 1973. One of the graphs this morning actually showed the growth of Asian American immigration, and my dad was one of those engineers who came here in the 70s and worked for Bechtel, who you might know, is a San Francisco construction company, worked for them for 40 years. But you know, when they came here, my mom was 21, my dad was 27, and they left literally everything and almost everyone they knew to come here. They lived in San Bruno and Pacifica to start, and then Pacifica ended up being really depressing from them because they came from a place that was near the equator and full of sun. And so they then moved out to Contra Costa County, which is where I grew up and where they still live. But very early on, you know, in life, my dad in particular, I just loved history at a very young age before I really even remember. I was really interested in where they came from, and he was not shy about talking about the effects of British colonialism in India. He was born 2 years before independence, actually. It's a very, it was a brand new country. Just how destructive colonialism was and how that led to the structural poverty issues in the country. And really, he talked about, actually, I don't even know if he said it explicitly, but it was clear that there was really deep meaning behind the self-determination of people in that country. My great uncle, who my dad was was almost was like second father to my dad, marched with Gandhi. I actually didn't find that out until I was an adult, because nobody thought it was important to mention, I guess. But they also both grew up in pretty, India was kind of, I don't know, I don't like using the word backwards, because that's just not the right word, but technologically just was really behind, like the West, for example. So even when they moved here in the 70s, they'd never watched television, they never had a television, they didn't have phones they didn't have landlines in their home. Even in the 80s when I would visit, my relatives didn't have phones in their houses. They had to go out to make phone calls. They grew up roasting coffee by hand as one of their chores. My mom learned to cook as a young girl, and has cooked on everything from coal. It was coal, then kerosene, then these gas canisters that they would deliver that was rationed. So you had this much gas and that was it. So these are the stories I grew up with. And I also saw that my parents, they were barely scraping by here, but they always sent money back home. They paid for weddings, college educations for relatives, and probably things that I don't even know about. And so I share all of that to say that I only remember always wanting to do work that was in service, and that was also focused on helping people thrive who had intentionally been left behind. Because I could see the parallels between what colonialism did in my family's country of origin and what had happened here in the US. And so I've always been motivated in my career to focus on creating communities and systems and policies that are for the social good. And I chose to do that through public health work, and that work has led me here to work on economic security. And just, one last thing, my mom's favorite story is that she likes to tell about how she knew what my career path was gonna be is when I was about 5 years old. She was an Indian parent, so she of course wanted me to be a doctor, so she, I think it was, and I don't even remember this, so I only know this story from her telling me. She said, you should be a doctor. And I said, I don't want to be a doctor because I think charging people money when they're sick is not right. So, and I don't know, I'm like, did that really happen? But that's what she says. So I think it was fate that I chose the career that I did, and it's that history of my family that continues to be my motivation.
Elena.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elena Chavez Quezada. I'm Senior Director at the San Francisco Foundation of our People Pathway, which is all about economic security and expanding access to opportunity. So I'm going to be a little vulnerable here, so bear with me. So I say this with deep love and respect that I think most of us have families, whether they're chosen families or your kind of the families that you're born into, that have some level of dysfunction. I'm just going to assume that that's probably true. And my family is no exception. We've got love and talent and hard work and dysfunction and everything in between. So, and it starts, the origins of my family, I grew up in New Mexico, and my father's parents and generations before that were there when it was old Mexico. My mom's parents immigrated from Spain and Mexico, and they were both the youngest of 10. And my mom was just really determined always, and she was the only one in her family to go to high school and graduate from high school, but she really got wind of as an institution called Harvard, and she was like, that looks like a way out of poverty for my family. And so she really wanted 10 kids, and she wanted to send them all to Harvard. And she would tell everybody this, and they just thought she was so ridiculous. And education loomed large, right? It was like she would tell us the priorities are God, family, education, in that order. And so we heard that all the time. And anyway, she got halfway there. She had 5 kids. And when I became the 5th to graduate from Harvard, it was history for the institution, and that they had never had so many Latino kids from one family go to the institution. And we were on the Today Show, and it was really, it was exciting. And I was also super embarrassed for like 10 years. And then I realized, like, that's so dumb, because it's not about me, it's about my mom. It's about her determination. And I really respect and honor that individual determination, and I'm really proud of that. But if I'm real with you all, that's just part of the story, and I think it's important for us to be honest about our full stories. So in the not so hidden shadows of my family's story, there are deep struggles of addiction, suicide, incarceration, and poverty. And I feel that sometimes no amount of determination can conquer those deep systemic and structural issues that hit low-income communities of color the hardest. So I'm here because, and I engage in this work because I see and I celebrate and I honor those bright spots and those stories of individual determination that I see in my own family. But I'm also here because I really believe those stories should not be exceptions, and everyone should have access to the tools that they need to reach their full potential. To me, that's what equity is. So I've seen what education and economic opportunity can do for one family, and change the kind of game of economic opportunity in one generation. But I've also seen the tremendous work that we have to do to reform the systems and structures that would make that kind of economic opportunity accessible on a much larger scale. So that's why I'm here.
Wow, I love these beautiful stories.
Okay, hi everyone. I just want to thank Rise Together for inviting me to participate today. I know it's the end of the day, so I'll try to liven it up and, not put people to sleep. So my name's Alexandra Bastien. I am the Financial Stability Program Officer at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. We are a community foundation that does grant making to nonprofits primarily in San Mateo and Santa Clara counties, but we do have donors from all over the world and all over the country, so we give in other parts of the world as well. What brings me to this work? I am a millennial. Those crazy people who keep changing things. And I had the audacity to graduate from college in 2008. If anybody remembers what happened in 2008, the economy that, we were all being prepared to go into and become, workers and leaders of the future, that economy was gone. And everyone was like, what jobs? And myself and so many of my peers were struggling to find work. And at the same time, I noticed something really, really challenging that challenged me personally in my hometown. So I would say my hometown also is probably what makes me come to this work. So I went to Boston College, which is in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts, which is the richest town in Massachusetts. And when I got home to my hometown, which is Brockton, Massachusetts, I noticed that all the houses were boarded up, which is not how I left it, 4 years prior. And I found out soon after that a lot of my neighbors, and including my mother, many people were losing their homes because of the foreclosure crisis. And luckily, my mother was able to kind of fight back against some of the predatory practices that were happening at the time, but many of my neighbors didn't live there anymore. And when that happened, I knew right away that there was something that wasn't just like, it wasn't a mistake that my mom made that was causing this. Like that if every street I'm driving down at home has all these boarded up houses, like this is not something that one person made a mistake or didn't know what a variable interest rate mortgage was. This was widespread. The other thing that happened, all this was all in a very short period of time. The day after I moved back home from campus, I got a phone call, and it was a debt collector, and that told me that I had a past due student loan balance that I needed to pay in full. And it was the day after I moved home from campus. So many things happened within a short period of time that just confirmed for me that there was something crazy going on. And that led me over time to decide to go to graduate school, where I did public policy. And my first day of my first class in graduate school, I learned about the racial wealth gap. And I knew immediately that that was the thing that was hovering over my community that was created by policy and not anything that anyone in my community did. And I immediately kind of went on a path of trying to figure out what we do to correct this.
So I appreciate you letting everybody share their personal stories, because I believe it creates context for the work they do, and I appreciate the vulnerability and authenticity of your stories. And I'm going to skip over sort of the trends because we've had so much of that today. What I really want to do is dive now directly into the panel around what work you're funding. So each one of these organizations, as you know, they are very deep in the work, and they're very deep in picking specific issue areas or specific opportunities that they're trying to enable through bringing resources to it. So what I'd like to do is actually ask each one of you, because you are representing important work in each of your organizations, to talk individually about what the specific areas are that you are focused on right now in terms of bringing resources to. And so maybe I'll start with you, Elena, just so we go in a different order, and then we can go this way, and then we'll have a broader, more open discussion with the panel.
Sure. So the San Francisco Foundation is broadly focused and unapologetically focused on racial and economic equity. And about 4 years ago, our CEO, Fred Blackwell, joined, and that was very intentional about that becoming our North Star, which is one of the things that's so exciting to me about working there, is that we can talk about these issues and just be really explicit about some of the challenges. So we're kind of divided into these 3 pathways called people, place, and power. So the power pathway is focused on building power within low-income communities of color, and civic engagement, and kind of using organizing to uplift some of the issues that are highlighted in the other pathways. The place pathway is really focused on the displacement crisis that we have in the Bay Area and housing. And then the people pathway, which I oversee, has been, I will be honest, we're in a little bit of a transition, so this is my first time kind of talking about the areas that we're honing in on for the next few years of funding and kind of engagement in the field. So there's obviously so many factors, all so interrelated, and it's always a very difficult process to, as a funder, to say, well, we have to be focused, we have to be intentional. And so the first area that we're really focused on is addressing the systems that criminalize and penalize people for being poor. And so there's a lot that can be underneath that, but a couple of examples. We believe that this starts in our education system with police and schools, with the kind of school to prison pipeline, where we're setting our young people up to be on a path not of economic opportunity, but quite the opposite. We also believe that the juvenile detention centers are a part of that ecosystem and part of kind of the criminalization of poverty. And the second piece of that is really reforming the harmful fines and fees that are just keeping mostly communities of color in terrible debt and without being able to kind of pick themselves back up, even when you're you've paid your debt to society, or you've done whatever you had to do, and then you're slammed with another $5,000. So I know there was already some talk about that, so I won't go into that, but it does get me very fired up. And then the second big area that we're focused on is building worker power. So we believe that a lot of the biggest change that we've seen when it comes to, for example, the Fight for 15 really came from the ground up. It was these incredible community organizers building power within their communities to say, we can't survive on this amount of money. Like, this is an economic injustice. So we building the capacity of local worker organizing groups, channeling high quality jobs generated by new development to local workers. Those are really important to us in building worker power. And finally, the third area is building community wealth. So we believe that it's important to kind of move beyond the concept of individual wealth, which is, of course, it is real, but also to think about how we can look at asset accumulation from a community perspective, whether that's community land trusts, worker-owned co-ops, and honestly, I think opening up an area of innovation where I think we have a long ways to go in this society of looking at wealth from a community lens.
All right, that is just excellent. And you know what? I'm going to go straight over to you, Alexandra. I happen to know that she is in some of the same areas that were just mentioned. So,
well, the funding that we do is a little different, even though I did work on some of those things that Elena mentioned. So the financial stability portfolio is focused on two things. It's focused on increasing access to public benefits. And it's also focused on increasing access to what we say are financial and tax preparation services. And the way that SVCF came to that was after a series of town hall meetings and community discussions. The foundation had been funding asset building and financial education work for several years. And as we started to come out of the recession, everybody knows that housing prices skyrocketed in the Bay Area. And what we were hearing from community was that there's no point in funding asset building when nobody can afford to live here. No one can pay the rent. People can't afford food. And so we decided to focus on what can we do to connect people to the resources that will get them at least some assistance in taking care of those things, our public benefit system. So we're funding work that looks at increasing access to CalFresh. We're looking at CalWorks, SSI, all of the different public benefits that are available. We're also looking at a newer, what we're seeing as a public benefit, a new benefit called Cal Savers, and we're considering that to be a public benefit. And I'm sure maybe we can talk about what Cal Savers is later. And then on the other side, our focus on tax time, that is looking at, we know that together, the earned income tax credit and access to CalFresh together make the largest anti-poverty program in the state. So we want to make sure that if we're connecting people to something like CalFresh, that we're also making sure that they're getting the earned income tax credit, they're getting any other credits that might be available to them, like the child tax credit. And we also want to leverage the moment and ensure that they can get any financial services that they may be eligible for or that they need at that time when they are getting their tax prep services. So we're funding groups that are working on financial counseling at tax time, savings programs that are at tax time, and even continuing the process of enrolling them in benefits if they find out that they're eligible after filing their taxes. So that's what the strategy is focused on.
that is great. Okay, Padmini, I'm excited to hear about your work in a deeper level.
Thanks. Well, this is going to be repetitive, I feel like, because the three of us have a lot in common, and we're together a lot, actually, which I think we're going to talk about in a little bit. Well, I've been there 4 months. Elena is my immediate predecessor, big shoes to fill. And I say that partly because I'll share with you kind of what the portfolio looks like now, but I imagine as I'm there for a while, it'll continue to evolve. So, but just to tell you about the fund as a whole, so we have an economic security portfolio, which I lead. We also fund work on education, primarily K-12 education, arts, Jewish life. And we also make a smaller number of grants focus on the safety net and disaster preparedness and other issues that might come up that are related to our mission. So for example, we're investing in work around outreach for the 2020 census. So the economic security work actually kind of lives in two places. There's my larger economic security portfolio, and then the safety net grant making I mentioned includes work on CalFresh, as Alexandra described, both policy and outreach and enrollment work to sign people up for CalFresh. We support the two major food banks in our region, the San Francisco Marin Food Bank and the Alameda County Food Bank, a variety of homelessness, direct services around serving the homeless, shelters, for example. So there's some overlap there, and we do try to work together when it makes sense. In the economic security portfolio, I think of the work as being in two buckets, and I just renamed them in my own head yesterday, so I'm going to share it with you. Because we had a chunk of work that was workforce development, but really it's grown to be more about work and income more broadly. And I say that because we do support workforce development programs, but also work on EITC is an important part of income, as Alexandra mentioned already. Also thinking a lot about the future of work or the changing nature of work, however you want to describe it, and what that means for particularly lower wage workers, workers of color, immigrant workers in the Bay Area, and what policies and systems need to be in place to ensure that automation and other gig work and other issues that are not even our future, but really are our present already, to understand what effect those are going to have on the communities we care about and what we need to do to make sure that they can share in the prosperity those things might bring. There's also, so the second bucket is what I would call our wealth building or asset building bucket. And that includes work to support entrepreneurship and small business development, which also relates to work and income, so there's actually a overlap there. Supporting work on, quite a bit of work on CalSavers, as Alexandra mentioned, which is the state's new universal retirement program. Ask us more if you want to know more, because it's quite an important new opportunity in California to build retirement savings and assets. Other work to build savings, address debt, address inequitable and predatory practices like fines and fees, as Elena mentioned, predatory financial practices and products. We support some financial coaching work. And I should say in both of these areas, supporting both direct service and policy and systems change work. And one of the things that I am working to do starting this year, but probably over the next 2 to 3 years, is actually increasing the portion of our portfolio that's focused on policy and systems change while still maintaining a robust part of our portfolio that focuses on direct services, really acknowledging that both are important, but as we've heard all day today, without making some really transformative changes in our systems and policies locally and in the state, we won't get to where we're trying to go. And then last but not least, as I shared, I have a public health background. And I came, before coming to the Walter and Elise Haas Fund, I was at the California Wellness Foundation for 5 years, a health foundation, but that thinks of health very broadly and uses a framework of the social determinants of health. You may have heard that. If you haven't heard that term, that basically means that where you live, work, and play, what your race is, what your gender is, what your income is, your socioeconomic status, all are strong drivers of health, and in fact are the majority of what leads to having good health outcomes or poor health outcomes. Healthcare is only about 10% of what contributes to your health. And so because we had that framework, I was able to fund work on employment and asset building, but also a set of work around connecting the health sector and the economic security sector in a more intentional way, both in philanthropy and on the grant-making side and with nonprofits. So I'm really excited that at the Walter and Elise Haas Fund, I'm hopefully going to be able to bring that framework and some of that work over with me, which would be new to the fund. And I say hopefully because I'm still in the process of, because we're not a health funder. I'm doing work to just educate our trustees and share what's been happening in the field. What is the health wealth connection? What are examples of, what would it really look like if we made, grants connecting, making the health wealth connection, sharing what's happening in the field. There's definitely a growing national movement to connect those sectors. And what a lot of us say is, we know the problem. There's mountains and mountains of evidence that the problems are interrelated very closely. And so if the problems are interrelated, why aren't the solutions, connected? And so I'm hoping to continue to move that work forward at the fund.
So I want to make sure we cover one more thing before I ask our closing question, but the one more thing I want to ask about is I was been really inspired today about just how people are really starting to do more and more collectively to address what are really complex and interrelated things, and that has inspired me probably more than almost anything I've heard today. But what has also inspired me is that these funders all work together, and often you may think they're working in isolation, but they are really working together highly collaboratively, and that's exciting also. So I'm just wondering if one or two of you just want to maybe share with everybody through, for instance, the Bay Area Asset Funders Network or anything else, how you all are starting to even align funding or start working together more collaboratively to bring more resources into the great work that's going on. Would any one or two of you just like to sort of share how you all are collaborating even as a funder community?
All three of us just came back from San Antonio yesterday, so we've been collaborating a lot.
I would say we do strive to collaborate, and I think that we have more we can do. And I think we are three individuals that are working hard to collaborate with each other, and I would say the philanthropic sector more broadly, that's probably not what we're well known for. So I think I'm constantly in a place of wanting to put the mirror up and say, are we really collaborating in a way that makes sense and that is best for the communities that we care about? But one concrete way is through the Asset Funders Network. Our wonderful Mona Masri over there has really helped organize us to understand kind of who are we funding? I mean, I know it's a simple question, but if we're a network, we should have a sense of if four of us are funding one organization, why are we having them go through 4 different application processes and 4 different site visits? And so we are trying to translate that very valuable information that we have into actionable items where we are collaborating with each other and reducing the burden of reporting and applications and site visits on organizations that we think so highly of.
So I am sharing that we've got to get to the closing question, but I just want to say also being a part of this community, it's really enlightening to me because I always feel so badly about the fact we're trying to lift up capacity and sometimes we take out capacity. So it's very encouraging how people are thinking about that in a more partnership, co-partnership kind of way. So for the closing question, I've asked each one of these people just very quickly, 60 seconds, 1 or 2 minutes, to say if they could give any one tip or piece of closing advice to anybody in the room for nonprofits or grant makers that are leaders supporting this work, just what that one tip or piece of closing advice would be. So we're just going to go down the line. I'll start with Padmini, and we'll just see what your one piece of great closing advice is, and then we'll close out.
So I thought about this for a while. There's kind of the usual tips about grant applications or whatever. But what I'm not, I shouldn't diminish that. That's really important. But one of the things, the tip I want to share with you is something that I've definitely talked with both Elena and Alexandra about before, and is really about the relationships between funders and you, if you're a nonprofit or grantee. You know, I know there's definitely an imbalanced power dynamic there. Like, I recognize that, I own that. I know that I'm in a position of privilege and holding dollars that nonprofits really, really need. But I also just want to share, and maybe this sounds kind of obvious, but I think what I've learned, because I actually had negative impressions of philanthropy before coming in from my own experiences doing grant writing and interacting with grant makers. But I have to say, like, I have found in the field, these two amazing women included, that the majority of the program officers that I've encountered, and I think that you will encounter in this work, are in it for the same reasons that you are if you're, a nonprofit, and we're all focused on the same thing, but trying to do that work in different ways. And I think getting to know your program officer, if you can, I know that's not always possible, but if there are opportunities to get to know your program officer in a deeper way that's, beyond, because I think our field has set up such a transactional approach to grant. It's all about like that proposal and the dollars and the grant recommendation you have to write. But I feel like what's been most rewarding to me, and what surprisingly to me made me want to stay in this field for longer than I thought, was those deeper relationships where we really can get to what the more serious issues are, and where nonprofits can actually then be honest with me about what may not be going well, and if I don't know that, then I can't help. But you can't get there without that deeper level of, if you're just at the transactional level, you can't get there. So I don't know that that's so much a tip, but I think something to, I guess, just think about as you're interacting with philanthropy, or maybe even, if a program officer is not operating in that way, maybe, asking more questions of them, or trying to, engage with them in a different way.
Okay, so one last tip. We'll just keep going and then we'll close out.
So for grant seekers, I would say the relationship piece is really important, and I think to the extent possible, building that relationship is super meaningful. And I would encourage you to discuss the challenges too, because most of us have all worked in nonprofits for most of our careers and know there's a lot of hard work, and to ask for what you need and to be direct. For any funders in the room, I would say if the answer is no, if you're really unable to move forward, to say that clearly and respectfully and without delay. And I think to, kind of building on the network of philanthropy, which feels like a black box, to help demystify it a little bit and make introductions when appropriate. Those would be my words of advice.
I'm new to philanthropy. I've been doing this less than a year now, so I still don't see myself as like someone in philanthropy. I still see myself as an advocate. I still see myself as a person who's still trying to solve that problem back in her hometown. And I see myself as a partner to any nonprofit, whether they've been funded or not. I really enjoy being a thought partner. I've had several organizations that have applied for grants that have said, this is the problem, but then the project that they proposed, for whatever reason, maybe for good reasons, maybe for just misunderstanding about what would get a grant, they propose something that doesn't address what they said the problem was. And I've had a great experience. I'll say one of our grantees I had a great experience with Parents Helping Parents, where they're working with parents who have children with disabilities and trying to help them get access to all the available funding, public funding that's available to them, which is a lot of money, almost $55,000. And so, you know, I enjoyed working with them to say, okay, we're saying that there's $55,000 on the table for these households. So let's figure out like a strategy that gets them $55,000 beyond just outreach or communication or something like that. But I want to get them $55,000 if we can. So I would just encourage us all to kind of think of each other as partners, that we're all, at least the way I like to assume that we're all trying to get somebody $55,000, maybe ourselves, but that we're partners trying to get to the same goal, even whether the grant makes it through or not. That doesn't necessarily mean that the goal is not aligned.